Hello and welcome back into Yepso's universe. Today we're going to talk about the other bodies and organizations of the European Union which are not considered EU institutions but are nonetheless key to how the European Union is organized. My name is Carlos Gil. I am the training director at Yepso and a researcher in European affairs affiliated with the University of Alcalá, one of the oldest universities in Europe, founded all the way back in 1499. My research activity as well as my work at Yepso focuses on the European civil service and its selection processes. Just like in the previous video, this week I'm still working from the United States, which is why I am not filming in my office or wearing my usual teaching outfit. In any case, as you know, what really matters is not the continent, but the content. As I have mentioned in previous sessions, Yepso's universe is in a pilot phase. We have never produced this kind of YouTube video before, so any feedback you can share with us is more than welcome, and above all, we'll genuinely be taking on board. Thank you for all your ideas and suggestions, and of course for the messages of encouragement, and obviously also for all the congratulations messages that you have sent. Those messages are greatly appreciated, but your constructive feedback is even more valuable because it helps us improve. Taking into consideration some of our suggestions, this week we are going to approach this content a little differently. Many of you like the way I explain the content, but you would find it shorter videos even more useful and easier to, let's say, digest. That's exactly what I will try to do. I have got a lot to share, but I will try to keep it concise. As always, I will be keeping a close eye on your feedback. You can reach me on LinkedIn or Instagram as before, but I would really appreciate it if you could also leave your thoughts in the YouTube comments. It's much easier to consolidate the feedback here. In this session, I'm going to set the scene and outline the main EU bodies and organizations that we have not covered in the previous video. I will break them down into 5-part classification. I will also give you a quick overview of each group so you have a global picture. If this is a topic you would like me to explore in more depth in future sessions, do let me know. Ready? Let's go to it. Right then, in the previous session I explained what the EU institutions are and said that, by way of analogy, they represent the skeleton of the European Union. They provide the fundamental structure that any body needs. However, a body with only a skeleton isn't viable. It needs organs and muscles, and in a way, the EU bodies I'm going to share with you today perform a similar function within the Union. Before I tell you what they are, I would like to start with a quick question to see how familiar you are with all these topics. What do you think? I will give you 1 minute to solve it. The time starts now. All right, time is up. What do you think? This one was fairly straightforward, wasn't it? In fact, if you paid close attention to the list of institutions I shared a moment ago, you should have been able to find the right answer quite easily. In any case, let's go through each option one by one. Option A cannot be correct because it includes the Council of Europe, which, as we saw in the previous session, is not an EU institution, but an international organization outside the Union. Remember, The Council of the European Union, often simply called the Council, and the European Council are EU institutions. The Council of Europe, however, is a different international organization altogether. Option B is not correct either, because the European External Action Service, as we will see later in this session, is not an institution but an EU body. It is part of the EU ecosystem, but it does not have the rank of an institution. Option C is also incorrect because it includes the European Community of the Regions, which is a consultative body, as we will also see in a few minutes, but not an institution. And finally, whether by a process of elimination or, I hope, by conviction, option D is the correct one. All the bodies listed in option D do have the rank of EU institution. Of course, some are missing, most notably the Commission, the Parliament and the European Council, but based on the wording of the question, it wasn't necessary for them all to be included. Always be careful with how questions are worded because they can contain little traps. So, after breaking the ice with that question, I would like to give you a panoramic overview of the topics we are focusing on today. The European Union only sets out a closed list in Article 13, paragraph 1 of the Treaty on the European Union, specifying which bodies are considered institutions. However, it does not specify the full range of other EU bodies and organizations. This is largely due to the highly dynamic nature of the Union's structure. There is no closed, definitive list that you can simply consult. That is why I hope today's session will help you form a panoramic view of how, beyond the institutions, the European Union is also structured. I also hope this serves you as a guide. Of course, since there is no closed list, the classification I'm going to present is based on my academic interpretation. In other words, it's a subjective view built on objective elements. This means you should keep in mind that there is no absolute truth here. You might read other academics who suggest alternative, though relatively similar, classifications. As you know, in academia there are always many theories, most with at least some valid points. Today I am presenting the one I personally support, which I believe is reasonably neutral. As we have already seen, the basis of EU's administrative structure is made up of its institutions. Beyond them, we can distinguish several categories. First, we have the consultative bodies of the EU. Second, we can classify certain autonomous bodies which extend the functions of the institutions or act as a mechanism of oversight. Third, we have the institutional bodies. Fourth, I have chosen to dedicate a cluster specifically to EU agencies. And finally, in a more open-ended category, what you might call a catch-all drawer, I include other bodies and organizations which don't formally fit into any of the previous groups. This is my general categorization. In the coming sessions, if you are interested, we will explore these groups in more detail. However, I don't want to miss the opportunity today to share with you the most essential features of each cluster. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, we come across the consultative bodies of the European Union. These are bodies that give a voice to and represent different social groups within the EU in its decision-making processes. There are two consultative bodies in the EU: the European Economic and Social Committee, which represents the economic and social sectors of the Union, and the European Committee of the Regions, which promotes the participation of regions and municipalities in the EU. So, what is the actual role of these two bodies? Their main task is to issue opinions and reports on areas of relevance to the Union. In the context of legislative procedures, they are required to produce and deliver opinions on certain specific issues. These opinions are not legally binding, but they do carry significant weight. In addition, beyond this formal role, they may also issue opinions on matters they themselves consider important in order to influence the institutions when drafting legislative documents. In the next session, we will explore in much greater depth what these two consultative bodies actually do. Secondly, we have the group I categorize as the autonomous bodies, which correspond to those that extend the functions of the institutions or act as mechanisms of oversight. Under these categories, I include all those bodies which, while enjoying functional independence, play a key operational role in the European Union. In other words, they are bodies which, although not institutions, nonetheless perform an extremely important role in the functioning of the EU. There is no completely closed list of such bodies, since due to their legal nature, the classification involves many grey, let's say, areas. However, we can confidently identify the following bodies within this group. On the one hand, we have the European External Action Service, which serves as the diplomatic corps of the European Union. We can consider it a sui generis body, given its complex legal nature. It is under the authority of the High Representative, who is also a Vice President of the Commission, but it is neither an institution in its own right nor a body dependent of the Commission. It is regulated in Article 27, paragraph 3 of the Treaty on the European Union. It is an administrative body with its own structure and staff, composed of officials from the Council and the Commission, as well as national diplomats on secondment, which reinforces its hybrid character. We will devote an entire session to this body in future weeks. On the other hand, we have the European Investment Bank, which is, so to speak, the Union's financial body. If the European Central Bank is the monetary institution, the EIB is the financial one. The EIB can be considered an autonomous body because, although it was established by the treaties, specifically in Articles 308 and 309 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, it does not hold the rank of an EU institution. It is a body with its own legal personality. Its capital is owned by the member states. Its primary role is to finance projects of European interest, both within the EU and in third countries. In fact, the European Investment Bank is in practice one of the largest multilateral development banks in the world. Another body to be considered in this category is the European Ombudsman. This is an autonomous oversight body within the EU, created by the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992. Its fundamental mission is to investigate citizens' complaints about cases of maladministration in the EU's institutions and bodies. If the European Court of Auditors audits the economic and administrative management of the Union, the European Ombudsman scrutinizes the conduct of its institutions and bodies. The European Ombudsman is independent and does not receive instructions from any institutions or government. Its decisions are not legally binding, but in practice they carry great political authority. For example, the Ombudsman reports addressed to EPSO have led to significant changes, such as, for example, the reform of its examination platform. Put briefly, the European Ombudsman aims to strengthen transparency, good administration, and citizens' trust in the EU. Also in this classification, we can find the European Data Protection Supervisor. This body was established in 2004 to ensure that EU institutions and bodies respect the fundamental right to the protection of personal data. It operates with full independence. As its name suggests, its role is supervisory. In addition, it cooperates with national data protection authorities through the European Data Protection Board, thereby reinforcing consistency in the application of the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. Within this category, we also have the European Public Prosecutor's Office. This is an autonomous body established in 2017 by a Council regulation within the framework of enhanced cooperation. Its mission is to investigate and prosecute crimes affecting the Union's financial interests, such as fraud involving EU funds or cross-border VAT fraud. In other words, it goes a step further than the European Court of Auditors. The Court of Auditors audits but does not investigate crimes, whereas the EPPO does. The EPPO is judicial and prosecutorial in nature. It is independent and works in close cooperation with national prosecution services. With its creation, the EU took decisive steps toward more effective protection of its budget and of European taxpayers' resources. Also, within this category, we find the European Anti-Fraud Office, the OLAF, which was created in 1999. This is an autonomous administrative investigative body operating within the Commission, but with full independence in carrying out its investigation. Its main mission is to protect the EU's financial interest by investigating fraud, corruption and irregularities linked to the EU budget. OLAF has no judicial powers. Its reports and recommendations must be forwarded to national authorities or to the EPPO in order for action to be taken before the courts. It works in close cooperation with the Court of Auditors and the European Public Prosecutor's Office. So these are some of the key autonomous bodies that I consider relevant to include in this category. However, as I mentioned earlier, this list is not exhaustive, since we could also include other bodies such as the European Cybersecurity Competence Centre, the European Data Protection Board, or even more varied ones such as the European Investment Fund, the Single Resolution Board, or the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. It is impossible to cover all of this information completely in a single session, but if you would like me to expand on any specific area, please do let me know in the comments. Well, let's keep moving forward. The third group corresponds to the institutional bodies of the European Union. These are bodies created by the EU institutions to provide them with the common services they require. Within this category, we can clearly identify four bodies. On the one hand, we have our very much appreciated EPSO, the European Personnel Selection Office, which is responsible for establishing a general framework for the selection of the best candidates to work in the EU institutions, as well as for organizing the selection procedures. There is also the European School of Administration, whose aim is to contribute to the training of EU staff by providing courses in specific areas. Another interinstitutional body is our valued Publications Office, the official provider of publishing services. It organizes, systematizes and publishes a vast amount of relevant information about the European Union. It is a fantastic ally for anyone who wishes to gain a deeper knowledge about the EU in general or about a particular policy or body in detail. Finally, the fourth interinstitutional body is the Computer Emergency Response Team, which, as its very name suggests, manages threats to the IT systems of the European institutions and also maintains close cooperation with member states. This category was relatively straightforward to define and also to explain, wasn't it? Okay, now let's move on. In the fourth group, I classify the agencies of the European Union. Do you know what they are and do you know what they do? Well, let's put it to the test with a question. Are you ready? You have 1 minute to answer this question. Here we go. What do you think? Tricky? Hopefully not. If you already knew a little about the agencies, you probably reached the conclusion fairly quickly that the correct answer, because it contained an incorrect statement, was option D, since the Euratom agencies do indeed form part of the EU's network of agencies, albeit with a distinct legal basis, the Euratom Treaty. However, if you were not yet familiar with what the agencies are, or at least not in detail, don't worry, we are here to look into it together. Let me briefly explain. The agencies of the European Union are bodies created to carry out technical, scientific or specialist management tasks. In other words, they were established to deal with issues that are too complex or too specific to be handled directly by the institutions. Beyond this technical rationale, and very briefly, I can tell you that the creation of agencies also has an important political background. Since the 1970s, and especially with the Maastricht Treaty, which, as you know, was signed in 1992, and the creation of the single market, the EU assumed new competencies which would have required a substantial increase in the size of the Commission. However, some countries, notably the United Kingdom, but also some Nordic states, feared that if the institutions were to take on all these functions by hiring more officials and expanding the institutions, the European Union would become too powerful. Using the argument of avoiding bureaucracy, the agency model was introduced, which has brought us to where we are today. What is interesting about the agencies is that although they are part of EU system, they are autonomous entities with their own legal personality, and they are spread across the entire territory of the Union. They address areas as varied as food safety, satellites or vocational training. A very clear example is the European Medicines Agency. It was created in 1995 and is now based in Amsterdam. Its main function is to guarantee the quality, safety and efficacy of medicines for both human and veterinary use through the Union. But well, what matters here is that you know the agencies can be divided into four main groups. First, there are the decentralized agencies. There are more than 30 of them, and they support the implementation of EU policies. Examples include the EMA, Europol, the European Union Aviation Safety Agencies, for example. Secondly, there are the agencies under the Common Foreign and Security Policy, such as the European Defence Agency, the EU Institute for Security Studies, or the EU Satellite Centre, which provide analysis, intelligence and military or diplomatic support. Thirdly, there are the executive agencies. These are created by the Commission to manage EU programs for limited period of time. For instance, we can include here, for example, the European Innovation Council and the Small and Medium Enterprises Executive Agency, which support innovative small and medium-sized enterprises. Finally, there are the Euratom agencies and bodies, such as the Euratom Supply Agency, which ensures a fair and secure supply of nuclear fuels, or the Function for Energy Joint Undertaking, which manages the EU's contribution to the ITER nuclear fusion project. It is not necessary for you to memorize each and every agency, but I do recommend that you take an afternoon to look through them and understand what they do. If this topic is of particular interest to you, please let me know in the comments and I will consider devoting a full session to these areas. What really matters is that you understand that the agencies are the technical and specialized arms of the Union. Do not expect them to take major political decisions. That is the task of the institutions, but they are essential for developing the Union's more specific areas of work. Lastly, within our classification of bodies and entities, we have the category I call other bodies. This is a wide set of organizations that, due to their legal nature or the activities they carry out, do not fit neatly into any of the categories I have just described for you. They are not institutions, nor autonomous bodies, nor interinstitutional bodies, nor decentralized or executive agencies, or any of this kind. Here we could also include bodies closely linked to the European Union, even though they are not legally part of its structure. A good example of this is the European University Institute in Florence, created in 1972 by a convention between the member states, or Eurocorps, a multinational military force that can be placed at the service of the European Union Common Security and Defence Policy. In short, this is an open-ended category that does not lend itself easily to strict boundaries. And if you think about it, this makes sense. This body shows that European integration is not limited to the classic institutions, bodies or agencies, but also adapts to the real needs of governance. And with this brief reflection, we come to the end of this session. What do you think? Did you learn something new today? I hope so, and that you found it useful. That's the main part. In the next session, we are going to talk about the consultative bodies so that you can gain a deeper understanding of the first category I referred to today. However, let me remind you that I'm completely open to hearing your suggestions for other topics that you would find useful for us to address in the comment sessions. Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. And if you don't have any suggestions right now, I would still encourage you to leave a comment telling me what you thought about this session. It is really helpful not only to know that there is someone on the other side of the screen, but also to help me adapt the content for future videos. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and activate the bell. It's quite funny that I said today that this video was going to be shorter, and at the end the night just came. Well, have a very good week and see you very soon. Bye bye.